All right, guys, we get the show on the road. Thank you for being here. Come on in, grab a seat wherever you can. My name is Rich Jones. I'm the CEO here at Favor Greenville, and you're here for family group, just so you make sure you know where you are. This is who I am professionally. Spent the majority of my career doing work in the clinical setting, places like outpatient drug and alcohol facilities, outpatient mental health facilities, inpatient drug and alcohol facilities, inpatient mental health facilities. But I guess at this point, 6.5 years ago, I left that side of the fence and I jumped over here to help start Favor Greenville. Favor Greenville is a recovery center. We don't do assessments, we don't do diagnosis, we don't do therapy, we provide coaching. And so tonight is meant to be an educational session. We provide education, coaching, advocacy, that kind of stuff. We're not meant to replace anything you're already doing if you're seeing a therapist or doing anything like that. We want you to continue doing what you're doing, and also we'll try to encourage you to get involved in other things at different times. This is really meant to share information and try to answer questions. And it's interesting through this process, just kind of just so you understand sort of the theory behind it. The idea would be the more you know, the better you will be able to handle the situation. Obviously, information alone doesn't solve anything. It's not like we expect you to hear this and you'll have a great answer for what you're dealing with at home. This is one of the most complex, baffling issues that people can deal with, to be perfectly honest. It's an ongoing process. It's not a one-time event. Sometimes it takes, you have to intervene continuously in situations. You feel like you're never done with the situation. You feel like even if the person goes to rehab, it's not over at that point. It continues after that. And so it's really a matter of how does the family wrap their mind around that and get ready to deal with this. And then some ways to take care of yourself along the way, some ways to deal with stress, some ways to deal with anxiety, depression, those kind of things. the stuff that comes along with any high risk or trauma-filled situation. And dealing with a loved one's addiction is definitely a trauma-filled situation. So, and then the other thing that we focus on right off the jump, it's very difficult for families to talk about this, to deal with this, to come to places like Favor Greenville because of the stigma and the shame and the embarrassment and everything that goes along with this, and this idea of this is something we should keep, behind closed doors. We don't need to let anyone know about this. People at work don't need to know. People in Sunday school class don't need to know. People at my kids' school don't need to know. We just got to keep this stuff quiet. I grew up in a home where substance use disorder defined my experiences early on as a child. I had to deal with my father's binge drinking. If you know anything about binge drinking, it's crazy. It can go really well, and then all of a sudden, boom, it'll pop off. And when it would pop off, it got ugly. It got really bad. I was ashamed. I hung my head. I knew something was wrong. I never knew what it was called because we weren't allowed to talk about it in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, that's right. I come from the 70s and 80s. That's how I roll. Rubik's Cube and Atari. Anyone know what that is? Okay, all right. So I'm a person in recovery. In addition to all this stuff, in addition to all these credentials and letters that you have to get after your name to do this work and work in this field, I'm also a person in recovery myself. I was addicted to alcohol or alcohol use disorder way before opioids entered my life. But in 1999, I was in a car accident. I walked out of an emergency room in Western Pennsylvania with 120 Darvocet, and this began a 2.5-year odyssey that took me to any depth that you can think of. Suicidal thinking. The options weren't there to go to the street for me. I didn't know how to go to the street and get heroin or get fake pills. I would have done it in a minute. When you're sick and you're going through that, and you're going through that physical withdrawal and that psychological craving, I would have went and got whatever they told me would work. But it wasn't really an option then. We didn't really have that. It wasn't commonplace. So we would run around from doctors to doctors and trade pills and do whatever we could and steal pills out of medicine cabinets, people's medicine cabinets, family members' medicine cabinets, lie, steal, all that stuff. In the meantime, going to work every day, and everybody thought I was the bomb. I was getting promoted. I was running a company that was in the HR business. It was recruiting people to hospital systems. Really ironic part of the job was recruiting psychiatrists to hospital systems. That's very strange if you think about it. I'm in the middle of this myself, and part of my job is to get psychiatrists to come work for us. But I was very good at this. I was very good at what I did, and nobody knew. To this day, there are people I worked with that if I tell them I'm in recovery and this is what I do for a living, I think they would be surprised. But the people that knew were my family. My mom, my wife, my kids were kind of young, and maybe my brother-in-laws, my brothers. That was the central group that knew what I was up to. That's why we're so big on family recovery, because you guys are on the front lines of this stuff. And many times, even if your loved one won't talk about it, you're here and you're willing to hear, and you're a willing customer of this service. So we want to give you all the information we possibly can. And we have a way of going about it. I'm going to give you some basic stuff tonight, and then I asked some people for some information on what they wanted to hear about, and the thing that kept coming up was this idea of communication. How do we communicate with somebody who's actively using? How do we communicate with somebody in early recovery? So that's where I was going to go with it tonight. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the basics, just in case anybody here is new, and then I was going to move into how do we communicate around this issue. Does anyone else have any other topics or any other issues that they want to make sure we talk about tonight? Any burning issues that they feel like we need to address? I'm very open to suggestions. Yes?
Just any first-time parents of someone coming out of a treatment.
Okay. Setting.
So there's going to be some changes, but he's going to have to be home for a little while. We already have some structure built into the day and changing job but what are the most important things maybe
I'll definitely
keep in
talk
mind
about that
on those first few days back home? Or
so her question was specific pieces of advice or specific pieces of information related to somebody coming out of treatment back into the home, right? That's That is an absolute scenario that we have quite a bit. And I'm going to talk tonight about communication in general, and what you're going to find is, even with the pieces of advice I give you related to that scenario, it really comes down to how do you communicate what your boundaries are? How do you communicate what your expectations are? Family recovery is all about that particular skill set. Two things really. How do you communicate what you feel is going on with a person and what your expectations are in the relationship? And that could involve a lot of things. It could involve you're living in our house. It could involve we're paying some of the bills, or it could just involve connection, right? It's just, here's what our expectations are in this relationship. And then the second thing is, how do you deal with the stress and the frustration and the anxiety and the sadness and the fear and the guilt and all the negative feelings that come up while you're setting the boundaries and while you're trying to do your life while your loved one deals with this. Those two areas. So I'll definitely get into some of the specifics, but keep in mind it all comes down to how do we talk to somebody about it and how do we set the boundaries. You want to try to get this as simple as you possibly can. What are we dealing with? What's it called? Why is it so hard to talk to these folks? Why is it so hard for them to see that they're destroying themselves? That type of information. And then how do we set boundaries and how do we deal with stress? And you also want to be careful. Anytime you're dealing with any healthcare issue, or for that matter, anytime you're dealing with any issue, period, people want to give you advice. Agreed? Yes. There are a lot of armchair quarterbacks out there. And there are a lot of people who will tell you how to raise your kid, or there are a lot of people who will tell you how to do your relationship with your spouse or whatever. And they like to sit back and they like to issue this advice, either solicited or unsolicited. And I got to tell you that these people don't know what they're talking about. They 100% do not know what they're talking about. They are uneducated in this area. They are ignorant in this area. They are misinformed. And sometimes I feel like they're downright mean. And sometimes there are people who are close to you. Every once in a while, there'll be somebody that you feel like you have to interact with. Maybe it'll be your mom, the kid's grandma, or maybe it'll be a sister-in-law, brother-in-law, whatever it is. You have no room for toxic people in your life right now. You have a plate. Think of your life as a plate, and you have enough stress on it that's real stress. You know, worrying about your kid, worrying about what we're going to do when he comes out of treatment, worrying about whether he should go to treatment, worrying about how we're going to pay for treatment, worrying about how, what's insurance going to pay for it. You have a full plate. You do not need anybody in your life. Anybody that begins a sentence with, if that was my kid, I would. Right? And then they're going to tell you something that they would not do if it was actually their kid. If it was their kid, there'd be a reason that they couldn't do it. Well, my kid's left-handed. I can't ask him to leave the house. Goodness, we know left-handed people die left and right. Right? Their kid was right-handed. That's why they should have set boundaries. And you don't. That's number one, because that's bad advice. To take knee-jerk advice is bad advice. But the bigger reason is it'll wear you out. Not only are you worrying about the real issues, you'll start worrying about what people think. And think of like stress as a bucket. You can only handle so much. You'll explode at some point yourself. You can only take so much. Does that make sense, guys? You are a person. You're not a cyborg. I don't think. Are there any cyborgs in here? Okay. Thank you, sir. Please don't kill me. All right. And then this is again just a way to think about and conceptualize what you're trying to get done when you come to a group like this, or when you're talking to a therapist, reading a book, anything related to the word recovery, anything related to family recovery. Setting boundaries is really about what do you do. It says for your loved one, but really for yourself and your loved one. This is the stuff that will move a person closer to recovery. All right, so this is the stuff that you can do that makes it more likely your loved one will seek out recovery. This is some of the old school stuff you've heard, words like enabling, tough love. We don't use those words, but they fall into this category. And then the second category is how do you deal with stress, and how do what do you do for yourself, but do you see they all feed into each other? You're going to be better at this if you're taking care of yourself. A perfect example of that is, I'm going to set a boundary that's going to be related to curfew. Let's just use the example of somebody coming out of rehab. A very common thing that will happen when somebody's leaving rehab is the therapist at the rehab will want to get together with the family and talk about, hey, what's life going to be like when you get home, and there's going to be curfew. And so curfew, we're going to set curfew at a certain time, but you have to deal with the fact that if they break curfew, what are you going to do? And then if they break curfew and you have to follow through on your boundary, how are you going to sleep at night and deal with the stress related to telling them you've now violated this, and then whatever falls into place after that. So if you learn how to deal with stress, the theory would be that you'll get better also at setting boundaries. So this is all interconnected. Fair enough? And limits and rules are part of it. My opinion, limits and rules aren't nearly as important as managing yourself and staying on course with what you want to do in any given situation. And what gets us off course? Why do we go against our own best judgment in any situation? Anybody want to take a guess? Why do we go against our own best judgment?
Yeah, your heart.
Your heart gets involved. It's easier sometimes to just give in.
Yeah.
There's this idea they will wear you down. People in active addiction are relentless because all they can think about is, I got to get a hold of this. I got to get a hold of this. I need to get a hold of this. I need to get a hold of this. And you're like, well, no, I'm not going to help you out. I'm not going to give you the car. I'm not going to give you money. I need to get a hold of this. I need to get a hold of this. They're relentless, and they will literally wear you down. Sometimes it's just straight guilt. Sometimes it's just straight fear that'll get in the way of making good decisions. It's usually emotional stuff. It's not like you sit there and you logically say to yourself, well, I was wrong about this, so I'm going to go against my original point of view. It's, I'm scared, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm worried, so I'm going to give in. It's the same reason that I allow my kids to play video games all afternoon when my wife leaves on a Saturday, right? So the boundary is clearly, don't do that. And she's 100% correct in her assessment of the situation. They get nuts when they play video games all day. But as soon as she leaves and they're like, can I play a video game? I'm at some point, I'm just like, yeah, go ahead. Why? Not that I disagree with her, but it's just easier for me in the moment. And if you can identify why you're going against your own best judgment, you have a better shot at course correcting in that area. And you are dealing with a lot of baggage, guys. This is just caregiver stress in general. This isn't even only related to addiction. I just think that this is a really good set of information. It was written for folks that were helping people with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And I got to tell you, the parallels are very, very similar as to what it's like to deal with somebody in substance use disorder. Emotional and physical toll. They call it the 36-hour day. It's not even a 24-hour day. It never ends. It's always something. There's always something happening. You feel like there's always something happening that you have to deal with. Higher levels of stress. You feel like you're on call. I don't know how many people can relate to that. You can't really relax. How many people jump when the phone rings? You just literally jump like that. Or you get a text. What's going to happen next? None of y'all can handle a 2 o'clock in the morning phone call. Even if they were calling and it was like on West Coast time and they were calling to tell you won the lottery or something. It's still, what's it do? It triggers that trauma response. Unable to do what you enjoy. It's post-traumatic stress disorder. You guys are going through a trauma response. Literally, trauma is defined as fear for your own life or fear for the life of a loved one. And addiction falls squarely into those categories. You can start to develop your own bad habits. A lot of times alcohol and drug use. Feeling exhausted. How many people have just felt straight exhausted? Like, I can't do anything else. I just want to go to sleep. Right? It's constant. It's fatigue. We know that mental strain leads to fatigue as well. It's not just physical activities. You're not sleeping at night. What about inability to make decisions? What do you think happens when people get into this spot when they can't really decide? They feel paralyzed. What is that all about? Anybody have any thoughts?
If you just don't see any good answer.
There is no good answer. There's a term for this, and I can't think what it is, but when you're choosing between the lesser of two evils, when there's no clear right answer to the situation, and you're like, well, here's what's going to happen if I do this, and here's what's going to happen if I do this, and you're stuck in this paralyzed state because there's no obvious good answer to any of it. And you start to second guess everything you do. I don't know if that's happened to anybody. You start to second guess. Should we make him go to rehab? Should we not make him go to rehab? Should we try to get an intervention team together? Should we not get well, if I call, here's what's going to happen. If I call his girlfriend and see what she wants to do, if she agrees, if I call, well, he's going to get mad at me. And it's this endless cycle of rabbit trails that you're just chasing, and you're trying to figure everything out, and that's exhausting. It's exhausting for me to even stand up here and do it. And I've been in the middle of it. I know what it's like to wake up at night and look at the ceiling and think, and I know you guys do too, you don't want to make eye contact because you're afraid I'll diagnose you with something. Anxiety disorder, adjustment disorder, whatever it is. But like y'all do, you wake up, and believe me, it can happen to people without addiction in their life too, right? It can be financial issues, it can be other health-related issues, but you just stare and you start to try to figure it out. But as you're trying to, and that's not necessarily horrible in and of itself, but as you're trying to figure it out, you start to play all the different scenarios out in your mind. And you picture like a tree with all these branches. And now you're trying to figure out 20 different possibilities, none of which are good. That leads to this collective chronic stress, toxic. So this is why, and this is a crazy statistic, family members of someone with substance use disorder are 5 times more likely to be in the hospital than the normal population. That's staggering, guys. This will eat you up from the inside out. And that's why it's important to learn about it and also to learn about what you can do for yourself.
Why is that last one?
So chronic stress, if you look at different physical health issues, anything related from a heart condition to cancer even, or anything in between, chronic stress or toxic stress is the #1 contributor to those conditions. You guys know, like if you're stressed out, you're more susceptible to everything, like a cold. How about that? Or the flu or whatever it is. Your immune system's down. You're just a really easy target for any kind of sickness or any kind of illness, and you don't come back as quick. So this is why people say take care of yourself, and I'm going to talk through some of that. Now, let's real quick go through this because a lot of folks have heard my pitch on this, but not everybody who comes to Favor Greenville is quote-unquote addicted. There's a lot of different manifestations of this issue. If you look at how substance use breaks down in America, you see that 32% of folks use at a risky level. That means that bad things could happen to them and they should get help and they should stop. This doesn't mean that it's okay to just use at a risky level and cross your fingers and hope you don't get in a car accident and die. But if you were to go to a college campus on any Friday night, you would see a bunch of risky use. Agreed? Mm-hmm. But you may not see 32% of people who are addicted. There's a difference, and I'm going to talk tonight about that difference because it's very important when it comes to communicating that you understand that if you're talking to somebody whose brain has changed, and they've moved into what we call addiction or substance use disorder severe, they literally cannot process information in a rational way. They're not going to see things where you're going to sit down and you're going to lay out, hey, here are all the pros for continuing to use, and here are all the cons, and they're going to say, oh, I didn't think of that, I'm going to stop now. It starts to affect them at a very base level. It starts to affect us in a very basic way, very similar to I got to get something to eat if I'm hungry, or I have to get something to drink if I'm thirsty. It's all you can think about. So every night I went to bed. I was, probably 28, I guess that started. 28, 29. Every night I would go to bed, I'm not doing that tomorrow. I am not doing that tomorrow. I'm not doing it. I'm out, I'm not going to do it. I'm out, I'm not going to do it. I'd wake up and the first thing I could think of was I got to get a hold of this. And I would start scheming immediately. Who can I call? Where can I go? What doctor can I go see? I've already tried that, and I'm doing this like algorithm in my mind on who I've already seen, and I can't go back to that guy soon. It's too soon. I can't go over here. He blew me up last time. And I'm running this game in my mind, and then I'm like, Where am I going to go? What pharmacy am I going to go to? Because you can't go to the same pharmacy, and I can't use my insurance. And where am I going to get the money for this? So I'm going to tell you something. Buying prescription drugs for cash is very, very expensive. Very expensive. And so where am I going to get this? Oh, well, I'm running credit cards then. I'm like literally getting credit cards so my wife doesn't know I have the credit card. And now I have to get to the mailbox before the mail comes. And it's just like all day process that in the meantime I'm trying to work, right? And I'm getting in my car, driving by my house to intercept the mail. Insane. Absolutely insane. Exhausting. There is nothing fun about this. Do you get that? There's zero fun happening for Rich. It's not, there's no party going down. The party ended a long, long time ago. I'm obsessed because it has taken on the same tone as, it's a survival mechanism in my mind. And I'll stop here and you can ask questions, but that part of it is something that's important for family members to know. If you cross that line into addiction, your brain has now moved from this is fun, this is just a good time, to this is equal to survival. Any questions about that? I'm going to show you, this is what it looks like. This is literally the brain scan of somebody who's with substance use disorder severe. And what this demonstrates is a depletion of a neurotransmitter called dopamine. Dopamine is what drives that desperation. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's produced anytime you do something pleasurable that's good for you, that's pleasurable for you, and your brain says, do that again. So the best example is when you eat food when you're hungry. Dopamine is released, it tells your brain, do that again. If you don't have any dopamine, the only thing that you can do is be obsessed with getting dopamine. You literally cannot experience any kind of normal interaction through the course of a day. But the problem is, while you're getting the substance, you're pouring it into an empty bucket. So you're getting this and you're just trying to feed yourself these chemicals all day, every day, and you're not even, you'll hear people say, I was using to try to feel normal. Now, if with certain substances, things like opioids, alcohol, benzodiazepines, those are the best examples, you're also experiencing a very intense physical withdrawal. And I don't say this to try to make an excuse for anybody. And I don't expect you to forgive your loved one because I'm saying this, or to forgive their behavior and give them a free pass. My wife knows this, but if I go out and drink some beers tonight after this meeting and go home, she's not going to be like, oh, well, it's just a disease. Let me, help you get back on track. She's probably going to kill me in my sleep tonight if I do that. And I'm not sure if I would blame her, right? Because of all the things that went on. So this isn't an excuse for anybody's behavior. I've said this in here before. This is for you to understand that when you're talking to somebody who's in this state of mind, you cannot reason with them. You can't threaten them. You will not consequence them into recovery. Yes?
And is that why they avoid us?
That's why they avoid you. That's why they're not going to talk to you directly about anything. That's why they're unable to, a lot of times what you'll find is the person's he's unable to even process information or make decisions to even get to a conversation. The question that was posed last week was, how do I communicate with somebody? This came in on Facebook. So I post these on Facebook, and it came in as, how do I communicate with somebody who's actively using? And the trick, Carolyn, or the problem is that you might not be able to until they get a moment of clarity when they're in detox or something, or they're not, because it's very difficult to talk to somebody in this state of mind. Now, I don't want to say that across the board, and I'm going to give you some pointers on talking to people and encourage you to try to talk to people. But if you're out there and you've gone through this, you know what I'm talking about. They will argue with you and literally tell you what you just saw did not happen. Yeah. We will make you think that you're insane, and you'll be like, wow, it was a nice day today. And I'll be like, it rained all day. And you'll be like, no, it didn't. I'm like, and if I give me enough time, I'll convince you that it rained all day. 2 + 2 = 18. Let me explain to you how it does. I remember having situations where, I remember one situation distinctly, and where my wife literally kicked in the stove. Well, you guys know I'm in recovery. So there was a period of time when I wasn't quite as an upstanding citizen as I am now. I never stole things and didn't do any of that stuff, but I was involved in some nefarious activities at different times. And there was a period of time when I was a fan of cocaine. Let's just put it that way. And I was at a wedding, and we were using cocaine by going back to this bathroom. We would go back to the bathroom and come back out. And my wife knew we were using, right? And she was so against that, adamant against that. And she came back and she kicked the stall door open in the men's room where we were in there doing it, literally caught me red-handed doing it. And before the night was over, I convinced her that I wasn't. All right? I convinced her that I wasn't. Or I made it so uncomfortable with her that she said, okay, I believe you. And that night, my strategy was one of just, I will wear you down. I will just keep telling you the same story over and over again. And I'm going to tell you, like, and I started to turn it on her by saying things like, what kind of woman comes into the men's room anyway? So, oh yeah, you're mad right now. I can tell. Like I'm saying. So, that was 19 years ago. Let's all calm down, guys. That was 19 years ago. That was. She's over. She's pissed. People are pissed at me. Okay, so maybe let me rephrase. I knew a person who did this. I knew this guy one time that I hung out with who did this. So, but the point of that is that listen, I'm a good person, and I was a good person before. I was a good person even when that was going down. I'm telling you I was. I did a lot of things right, and I was not a mean person. I had no, like, I loved my family, and I loved my wife more than anything, and I loved my kids more than anything. But that's what happens whenever you get here. And my ability to just lie like that and say it over and over again until they just gave in is because I was in this desperate state of mind. Because I got to tell you, I don't have that in me to do today. I could not do that if I had to. You guys could say, you have to, pull this off. And I don't think I could because I couldn't do it convincingly. Here's what's weird. In those situations, I could do it convincingly. Almost to the point where I think if I'd had a lie detector attached to me, that I would have passed the polygraph. I'm convinced that I convinced myself of the story that I was saying. That I convinced myself of the righteousness of my being offended. And that is a hard thing to communicate to. Agreed? That is how do you communicate with that person? And that's the challenge. And in that case, my wife just bowed out of it and said, okay, whatever, you didn't do it. You didn't do it. She just gave in. How do we get through that barrier is going to be, we're going to talk about this, but do you see that fundamental challenge? And you have to be careful because if you keep on it and you keep talking to somebody who isn't listening and isn't going to give in, that's going to get worse probably, right? It's going to get more frustrating for you. It could get escalated in a lot of ways. You have to get a sense when you're trying to talk to somebody of, have I reached the point of no return and there's nothing I can say to get this person to listen to me? You guys know what I mean by that? You know your family member. You know who you're dealing with. You know when they get to that point that there's nothing else you can say, and that's when you want to pull back and try to figure like, okay, where do I go with this? How do I handle it? And walk away. So what do you do in any given situation? So first, before you start with communication, start with what do you want to see happen. A real clear in your mind on what you're trying to get done with the communication. And this idea of what do we do? And it's impossible to go through every scenario, guys. You have to apply this to your own circumstance. It's going to be very different for what do we do about somebody coming out of rehab versus what do we do with somebody who just got into recovery or somebody who's doing great or somebody who's relapsed. These are all different scenarios. But in general, here's what you can do, right? You can roll this through your mind. Your choices at any given period of time, and these are the ones that I came up with. But if you were to say to yourself, what are all the options in the universe? The first thing that you can do in any given situation is nothing different. You can come to one group and never come back. You can leave here tonight and say, that guy's crazy. I'm never coming back over there. I don't need to do anything different. I totally get that. I totally understand. maybe you don't know exactly what the person's up to, but that we have to acknowledge that is an option, right? The second option is you don't say anything to anyone yet because you're not sure what you're dealing with. You monitor the situation and you learn more about it. So maybe you're not sure the severity of it. It's maybe early on, or maybe it's a relapse and you're not sure the severity of the relapse. Do you guys get this one? You're allowed to say, I'm going to keep coming back to that group and continue to learn more. As a matter of fact, I'm going to see a therapist, or I'm going to talk to other people about this too. I don't really know exactly what's going down, so I'm going to learn more about it. That's absolutely an option. The third option, how many people have heard the term the elephant in the room? You're going to talk about the elephant in the room. You know that it's severe enough, but you're not quite ready to do an intervention, and you're not going to crank it up like that. Or maybe you know the person is relapsed and they're using again, and you just need to get this out. You need to get this off your chest. You need them to know that you know, and you need them to know that you're not just going to stand by and watch them self-destruct.
Will they ever not just blatantly deny it when you say we know?
So here's an interesting thing. I don't know if you guys could hear the question. What about how people blatantly deny it? I know you're using, no I'm not, right?
It's just pot.
It's just pot. It's just a hippie lettuce. And so, what do you say about that? It's interesting. I think this goes back to if we believe in this brain stuff, right? You have to know your loved one's situation enough to know how many times am I going to say this, right? Until I'm done saying it. One of the things that's interesting is I've always encouraged people to say something like this. The way that I say it is, just know that I know that you know that I know. Now, first of all, that'll just break their brain. And they won't get high for like 2 weeks because they'll just be sitting there going, or something like literally, I'm exaggerating with the way I said it, but it's this idea of, hey, I just want you to know that I know. I know exactly what's going down here, and I don't want to argue with you about it, but just know that I'm not fooled with this. What's that?
No, you don't. You don't know anything.
No, and then you leave it. You got to leave it. You get where I'm coming from? You have to not give in to the temptation of saying it again. Do you guys get this idea? If you're there, Carolyn, if that's where you think she's at in this process, and you're not going to get anywhere, you're better off ending it with something like, listen, I know, and now you know that I know, and I'm out, and that kind of thing. That's whenever you're getting to that point, guys, whenever you feel like it's going to be one of those circular conversations. You've had those circular conversations, haven't you? Where you feel like you're saying the same thing, they're saying the same thing, and we're going to say it again. Same thing, say it again, over and over again. And I want you to think about that just in terms beyond addiction. I've never seen anybody change their mind in a situation like that. I've never seen anybody actually win one of those debates where it's going round and round and they're saying, no, I'm not, and you're saying, yes, I am, yes, you are, no, I'm not, yes, you are. I've never in my life ever heard of a situation where the person finally said, okay, you're right, I am. And I think with addiction, it's almost impossible. Because remember what's happening here. Whenever they get to this point and you're having that conversation, what they're doing is they're protecting the addiction. They're protecting their ability to use.
Yeah.
All they want to do is be able to get high again. That's all I wanted to do was be able to get a hold of another one of these pills. So I'm going to say whatever I need to say to get you to back off. And it's at a survival instinct level that I'm going to go with this. Now, different people handle it different ways. I was never a person who got aggressive about anything. I never tried to use intimidation. You have to be careful though, because sometimes people, if they can't convince you verbally, they will try to intimidate you physically. Or they will also use other tactics or other kind of common tactics. A lot of things is people will start to threaten to kill themselves. People will start to threaten to kill you. People will start to threaten, and they will also start to say the most bizarre, off-the-wall, hurtful things. And this is when you probably want to say to yourself, I'm going to get out of this conversation, right? But this elephant in the room conversation would be maybe it's early on and you just want them to know you know and you're trying to get it figured out. It could be early on in a relapse. It could be just to make sure that you're getting it off your chest. Yes, ma'am.
I think that can be a parallel, at least in my experience with dealing with dementia family members as well. I mean, I finally realized you can't out-logic illogical.
That's right.
You just can't.
And you could drive yourself crazy trying to. I don't know if you guys could hear that, but it's a very good point. Like you can't out logic illogical. You can spend all day trying to, but at the end of the day, you'll be the one who loses that battle because they're not coming from it from that angle. The fourth thing that you can do is you can start to put together a team meeting, and I'm going to talk through that a little bit tonight. But this is the idea of we're going to start working toward an intervention, or we're at the very least going to get together, and many times you don't even have to do an intervention. You're just going to get everybody on the team together and say, we're done with this. And this is where the boundary part of it comes in, and this is where the idea of you can't be in the house if you're going to continue to do this. That's these conversations that start to happen. Or you could just try to put together an intervention. And intervention is whenever you're getting it done at that point. That's whenever you're sitting a person down and saying, you have to go to rehab today or leave the house today. This is when you're swinging for the fences. So a lot of people won't do this until they're 100% sure. Does that make sense? This is not an easy thing to do. The other issue is you can detach from situations, and this was the model that was used for decades. This is more of the Al-Anon idea, and it happens a lot with spouses. It's less common with parents to children, but spouses a lot will just be able to detach from the situation, and they'll say, I'm not going to try to respond to anything. I'm not going to try to tell you how to live your life, but I'm not rescuing you from anything. I'm not making anything okay for you. I'm not calling the boss and telling him you're not going to be there because you're sick, and I'm not coming and getting you out of jail. It's like I'm not going to confront anything, but I'm just going to step back, and whatever happens, happens. I can't handle it anymore. I'm going to detach. There are pluses and minuses to all of these guys, and you could do a quick exercise where you could write it down, and I just threw, these are just some of them. And you may even think of other options, but the idea would be what are every single possible option we have on the table right now, and then pick the best out of a list of things that you don't really want to deal with at all. You guys get that? Like none of those are going to stand out as a good option. The option that we want up here is, bring them over to Favor, right? And or wherever, and bring them to the fountain of recovery, and dip them in the fountain of recovery, and let's get this over with. That's what I wanted. Do you get it? Like that's what I wanted even as a recovering person. I didn't want to do all this stuff. I just wanted to let's just get this over with, right? But you guys know that the option you actually want doesn't exist. And the problem is because you don't have final control over the situation. Can we all agree to that? You actually are not the one pulling the levers and pushing the buttons in this situation. You're the one trying to get the person to that point where they're going to do that. Any other options or anything that you guys would put on the list that I didn't think of or talk about? You get the general idea? All right, so let's go through and talk real quick. The other thing would be try to have a team involved, or at least try to talk through who else needs to be in on these conversations. Mom and dad, brother, sister, husband, wife, whatever it may be. This is just a real quick exercise for me, right? So this is the person, this is your loved one in the middle, and whoever's at the first rung has to be involved. These are the people closest to the person. So in my case, it was my wife and my mom. They had to get on the same page. Do you guys get that? Other people we could deal with, like there are people out here, my brothers, other friends I had. There are people that they had there that didn't even really need to be there. But you got to get the people who are on the inside circle. If you're going to have a team meeting and you're going to start to talk about that, and you would just fill it in your own right. You would fill this in and you would start trying to work on it. Here's the reason why you want to have a team. There's strength in numbers. It's harder for me to tell 4 of you that you're crazy than it is to tell 1 of you that you're crazy. I can make one person question their sanity. But 4 people sending me the same message, that gets a little bit harder. So there's strength in numbers. You also might find somebody who you didn't necessarily think had, and you find out they have influence over this person. Are there any hidden people in this person's life that might be able to influence them to better decisions? I don't know. This is like, is there a girlfriend? Is there a boyfriend? Is there a friend? Is there someone involved here that you could bring in that would have an alliance with the person? I've seen situations where people who are on the surface, where you're kind of like, this person is a bad influence, actually be the influence that gets a person to go to rehab. This is when I was doing a bunch of interventions. When I was doing a bunch of interventions, it was not uncommon for me to have other people that used with this person in the intervention. Because they would, even though they were destroying their own lives, they would say in the intervention, I want you to go to rehab. Now remember, in those circumstances, I had a very clear objective. My job, literally, I was hired to get the person in rehab. So it was a little bit different than what we're doing here at Favor. But especially with younger people aren't necessarily as concerned about what mom and dad think as they are what their buddies and friends think. So perhaps that can happen. We don't need to talk about intervention. And then leverage. Where do you have some power over the person? Financial is always something that comes up. Are you paying for anything? Also, relationships and emotional leverage can come up. So this is all the idea of a team, and this is all the idea of jumping in. Or what questions do you have about a team? Or what questions do you have about who should be on the team? Anyone? Yes, ma'am.
One problem I've had is my son's in college, and in the past I've gone to friends and tried to get information, and he literally, I thought he was gonna get suicidal when the girlfriend was giving me information.
Yeah.
He found out because now I have entered his circle of trusted people, which is small, and I have bulldozed in, and now he is completely vulnerable and doesn't feel he can trust anybody in the world because I fucked it up for him.
Well,
But it's like,
but you try.
now I'm getting information again from somebody who's, and I can't call it out because I don't wanna kill my source,
Yeah.
but he's at school in Spartanburg, and he's doing really, really stupid stuff after he was doing really well. And I need to get him help, but he doesn't talk at all. He comes home, he says hey to the dog, he loves the dog, I'm like, how are you doing? I'm worried about you. Fine, not doing anything, I don't know why you're freaking out, and I'm like, well, because I've heard developed oxy and it had fentanyl or whatever, and you took it anyway.
Yeah.
And didn't die, I thought you died from that.
Yeah.
So now I'm like totally freaking out, and
Let me. So I don't know if everyone could hear, but there's certain situations you get yourself into where you're not sure what to do with the information or with the team, right? So if I get the friends involved or people that know more than me about what's going on, is that going to backfire? That is part of the problem, right? That is absolute. We have to stand here and acknowledge that could happen. But I'm assuming like you were in a situation where you don't have much choice, right? You're not doing this because you want to. You know, you're not doing this because all of a sudden, you guys get that? You're not waking up one day and being like, everything's kind of fun. Let me try to find a way to mess with my kid. It's not what's happening at all. You're literally going to be put into a corner where you have no choice. There's no great way to handle that when you feel like you're going to get blown up and it's going to wind up like I could say something, but this is going to wind up being worse because now I won't hear anything from anybody.
and not kill the other person because.
And he'll blow up at the other person and have an issue with the other person, and which will make everything worse. You have to. This is why people can't tell you hands down what to do in a situation like that, because you've literally got to use your judgment as you go through it. You've got to use your judgment on how much do I hear. Like, so I'm just making this up right now, but if I hear this again, I don't care. I'm saying something. I don't care what happens. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just saying that sometimes that's what happens. But it's not, there's no great answer to that. No great answer at all. Yes, ma'am.
How does your communication differ when she just happened to mention, he was doing great, now it's back to this? Hypothetically, if you say your child did stuff since February and they went through all these programs and sober living, blah, 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 now they're right back where they were again, like the last one said financial.
Yeah.
And you just say, you know, I'm done.
Yes, absolutely. This is where you have to honor your own feelings about this stuff. And people will get to the point where they're done. People will get to the point where they're done. You know, I've sent them to treatment. I tried to help. Hey, if you're a grown adult, this is where you're at with it, and this is what you're going to do. And I'm going to step back, and don't ask me to pay for the next apartment, and don't ask me to pay for the next car. That is absolutely, and a lot of people would say that's where you want to go with this. What I'm suggesting is that you have to be aware of your own feelings around all of this, and know that you're probably going to have some trouble with that. That's a hard thing to do. You know, that's a difficult.
Then what do you do when you kick them out and they can't find a homeless shelter? They can't find a friend to stay with?
Yeah. So you've had that experience where the person. I don't know how many people in here have had an experience where the person couldn't find a place to go. Which-
Within a tent.
Yeah, and you get to the situation where what do you do if you know that's happening? It's very similar to what you're talking about. Like, how do you do that? And I think, again, it depends on how much you've dealt with and how much you've put up with and where you're at in this process. A lot of people would say that I'm not ready to do that right now, but then you can talk to another group. This is the 5th time we've gone through this, and I am done, and I am stepping back. It's what is the worst situation to deal with? Is it worse to be living with this and kind of feeling like you're okaying it versus living with the uncertainty of the situation? I've heard there are definitely like times when there's both sides of that argument. You can get into both sides of that argument. Can you guys see that? There's definitely reasons to do both. I mean, I've absolutely heard people say, like, look, I know that this is what it is, and I don't really enable him. I don't give him any money or anything, but he's living in the basement, and at least I know where he is, and I'm going to deal with that. Versus, I can't have him living in my basement because I can't see it. I want him out. And do you see both of those are legitimate options? Both of those, based on what you're dealing with.
Sometimes you go back and forth.
And many times people go back and
We
forth.
did for a while.
Many times people go back and forth. Almost all the time.
The
Carol?
thing that convinced me that I had to say you can't come home even though it's snowing is she'd stolen from us so much we didn't feel safe.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a key time for me.
Yeah.
When you don't feel safe anymore, you're home.
Yeah. Another thing that you can start talking about, depending on the substance that you're concerned with, and we're going to bring these folks here next Monday. They will be here. If you have a loved one dealing with opiates, if you have a loved one, I'm going to tell you what I would do if it was my kid. Okay, I would get them Narcan. I would make sure they always have Narcan. And I don't know how I would say it if they were going to get defensive, but I'd be like, it's in your backpack or something. And they will be here next week, next Monday. The Phoenix Center will be here, and you'll be able to get Narcan. And I would just make sure that if they're not, because here's what's going down with young kids. They're doing what they just, and I know it's really hard to understand this whenever you're talking about opioids, but you got to remember, like in today's world, opioids, it's just another drug that's an option to party with. He just thinks he's doing what young people do. I know it blows your mind whenever you try to put that in the category of opioids, but it's true, guys. I'm just partying. It just is what it is. But when I was in school and we were just partying, it just is what it is. It was marijuana and alcohol. I couldn't find a pill if I had to. When I was in high school, if you'd have put a gun to my head and said you have till the end of the day to find a pill, I wouldn't even know where to start. But for kids today, that is an option. And so the Narcan would be, here's how you're staying safe. And I would give it to them, and you're not enabling them in any kind of way. Do you guys all understand that? Yes, ma'am.
That only helps if they have somebody with them.
Yeah, they got to have somebody with them, and they have to. And what's interesting is a lot of times people know that, and so they understand the purpose of Narcan. They can't give it to themselves. You guys get that? You have to have some. And but it would be something that you could try to do, and that's only from a safety harm reduction kind of point of
It
view.
also opens a conversation.
It's a different way of approaching it, where you're saying, like, look, I think you're going to die if you keep doing this. And all right, I'm not here to like jam you up, and I'm not here to tell you how to run your life, but I am here to give you Narcan because I love you.
I like that.
You could start to try to change it in that type of conversation. And I'm here to, and I'm going to favor to get Narcan because I'm worried about you and I love you. That's a different way of confronting the issue that may make it harder for them to. It might make it harder for the person to write you off then. Yes, ma'am.
Can you go before next Monday and get Narcan out of Phoenix?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And I think that this little paper over there has the specifics on that. Absolutely, you can do that. And you guys hear that? You can go next. You can go. I think you can go anytime. Actually, you can check that out, and you can go and you can get this, and you can give it to the person. Narcan only helps with opioids. It only helps with opioids, but opioids are the dangerous substance. That is what most people are worried about. Now, when it comes to talking to folks, we've used these little phrases before. Say what you mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. But I want to talk through that in a little bit more, a little bit clearer fashion. So the reason why we say those three phrases is because communication on any issue breaks down into 4 different steps, and 3 of which we're going to talk about tonight. One is the person who wants to give the communication. Do you even know what you want to say? And that's an interesting thing. Like, so my family used to say to me all the time, you need help. You need help. You need help. You need help. But they never said what help was. They never said what was going to happen if I didn't get help. They never said anything other than you need help. So they didn't even have a clear idea on what the actual message was that they want to say. So it starts with, what do we want to actually convey? What are our concerns? And so let's take anybody. Let me think here for a minute. So let's say that the issue is that you're convinced that your loved one is using. That's your concern. They were doing okay, but they're living in your house and something went sideways and maybe they started hanging out with the wrong crew again and they're using again. And you're convinced they're using. So what is it that you want to say to them in a scenario like that? What is it? Does anyone have a suggestion?
I want you to know that I know you're using.
So the first thing, that's what you have, and in some cases the first thing would be, I just want you to know that we're concerned and we're worried and we want you to get back on track. We want you to get back on track right now. Do you guys get that? Another option is, hey, we said you can't do this and be in our house. You cannot continue to do this. We're going to give you about a week and we're going to drug test you. Do you get? I'm not telling you which one of those is better. What I'm telling you is you have to be clear in your mind on what it is that your expectation is. You can't go to your loved one and say, you better get your act together or you can't live here. That's just open season for us to define what getting our act together is. And believe me, we can define that in a lot of different ways, right? Yes, ma'am.
How do you encourage the people on the same team, say it's the parents or the family? I've got family and friends going through this right now where they don't agree. Like, Dad says, I can't do this anymore. Mom, it's like, well, if we kick this person out, they're gonna die. Yeah. And then there's so much stress on the marriage or the relationship or the friendship or whatever it is. Yeah. I feel like I'm seeing that a lot with family and friends. And how do you? I think it's a great point. Do you go to counseling? What do you? So people in here have talked about going through that quite a bit. Like, one thing would be to try to get them to come to an educational session so that they could hear the information and make a decision after they have the information. A lot of times people will write it off and without even knowing what they're talking about. So, but many people have said, I tried to get so-and-so here and they wouldn't come. So maybe there's some books, maybe there's some online information. Somehow you got to get the person in front of some just information about here's what this is and here's what the risks are. And you have to do it in a way where you're not fighting with them, because if you're banging heads with them, or if the team is banging heads, this is very common. You could tell, I can totally tell when somebody's drugged somebody in here. I mean, you can totally tell by their body language and the way they look, and they're here and they're kind of like, I'm talking early on and like, and then by the end they're all down with it, right? Like, I'm just kidding about that last part. But you could tell people don't want to be here. I will tell you this, it was very interesting. Part of the reason why we created this format tonight was to try to get more men to come to this group.
Because men do not like the kumbaya, circle it up, talk about your feelings group. Right? They don't want to do that. But they might be okay with this, like, let's get some information from the PowerPoint. So you have to get creative, and you have to try to find a way. You would want to get them the basic information on what is a substance use disorder, and what are the different ways of thinking about it. And then the other thing is, here are the different options. Because one of the things that keeps people from seeking information is they think it automatically means they have to do an intervention. Or if I go hear Rich talk at Favor, that means I'm going to have to say my kid's an addict. That's not the case at all, guys. It's just literally information, and you'd have to work them. Yes, ma'am. YouTurn. So we have an online platform as well called youturn.net. youturn.net has a bunch of video content on it. High quality video content. We have low quality video content on Recovery Cartel, which is a blog. Anything that you could do to get the person to see, here's what you're dealing with. And then maybe if they came and it wasn't as bad as they thought, or it wasn't what they thought. People have very preconceived ideas of what addiction treatment's like and addiction services. They don't picture like a group like this. They picture it much more intense. They picture that I'm preaching to you, telling you better kick him out today, or don't even give him a bologna sandwich. There's a guy I know that says that. I'm like, what in the heck? Okay, don't give him a bologna sandwich. I'm sure that's going to make or break their recovery process. I was going to go to rehab, but I'm not getting a bologna sandwich now, so I'm not going to go. Whatever. Yes.
I found when I'm working with families that they may not want to come in because they, like you say, they don't want to be told what to do and all that, but as you talk through it, they begin to recognize that there are things that can make a difference that are not huge leaps. And I think that the biggest thing that keeps somebody from coming to a group like this is preconceived ideas, stigma around substance use disorder, and the idea that we're going to tell you this is what you have to do. But you guys, I hope you notice, like, there is gray area here. There is more gray area than there is black and white. And I don't know if you know this or not, but people get better from substance use disorder in a wide variety of ways. Only about 13% of people report, I got recovery from going to rehab. 46% of people report that they figured it out on their own. Now, they didn't really figure it out on their own. They got some support, but it wasn't classic recovery support. So the Favor model is, we don't care how you got better, just get better. And we will work with people even if they're still like actively using and trying to help them figure out. It would be, how do you get a person to this room to even hear this message is part of the problem. Does somebody else have their hand up? All right, so let's go here. So you got what I want to say in my mind, and then what actually comes out of my mouth. Has anybody ever had that experience where, I mean, in any area, not just addiction, but like, I mean, I've totally had that where I'll be like, I don't even know how I did. I tend to do that with my wife a lot. I'll be like, how did that just happen where I just said that? That was exactly what I wasn't going to say, right? So what do you do to make sure what comes out of your mouth is what you want to convey? And back here, we talk about, some people will even put together a script. Or they'll write bullet points on an index card to stick to the deal. All I want her to know and all I want her to understand is that we know what's happening and that we're here to help if she's ready to get help, but she can't live here as long as she's actively using, but we're here to help. And you want to stick to that message almost like a mantra. Because what's going to happen when you start the conversation? What's your loved one going to do? What's the receiver going to do when you start the conversation? Try to get you off into the weeds. We're going to try to talk about stuff that has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. We will talk about 1973. That time when you accused me of getting high and I really wasn't high. You know, and I've never trusted you since, and that's probably why I get high anyway. You know, all that stuff, all that distraction. So you have to stay on task, because the third aspect is what the person hears. And this is why we say, mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. The most effective thing that you can do for any human being to hear what you're saying is to treat them nice. It increases receptivity by about 31% if you create an atmosphere
of kindness in the room. And that is really hard when you're dealing with somebody who has stolen from you, when you're dealing with somebody who has put you through the ringer and kept you up night after night. It's very hard to do it in a nice way. But do you guys get that idea? If you want the person to actually hear what you have to say, you try to say it as nicely as possible. And, excuse me, that's counterintuitive also. Why is that counterintuitive?
Because you're bad.
Yeah, why would you want to be nice to this person? Why would you want to be nice to this person after everything they just done? And this is, you're enabling them by being nice. And understand the objective here, guys. You're not trying to let them off the hook with anything. You're literally just trying to get them to hear what you have to say. I'm going to tell you how it works, because this is what happened to me. There are all these interactions that I can think of up to the time when I went to recovery that all stuck in my mind and messed with me along the way. Things that people said to me, like times when my wife was crying, but kind, hard to, you know what I mean? Like it was a non-confrontational situation where she was genuinely concerned and about my welfare. And I can remember this like it was yesterday. Because there was a different vibe in the room. My addiction lived for confrontation and chaos. Do you guys understand that? Like our addiction, it's not comfortable in nice environments. We want to have a blow up. We want to storm out of the house and go get high. Self-righteous indignation. I can't believe that they said that to me. That's our world. And it's very hard to not go there because you're very, very frustrated and you're angry and you're heartbroken and you can't believe it's happened again. Now, as far as what do you do when somebody's coming out of rehab, this stuff applies to whether they're coming out of rehab or they're going to rehab or they haven't gone to rehab. You guys get that? It's universal on how you talk. The expectations about coming out of rehab, it'll be interesting. You will get exposed to a conversation about that. And I don't want to tell you exactly what to expect with that or what to do because I'd like to defer to where he is. But it will be something to do with, here's our recommendation, you see a therapist. Here's our recommendation, you go to X number of meetings. And here's our recommendation, you change. It'll have something to do with environmental, like change people, places, and things. And you were working in this place, work somewhere. It will be those type of, it'll be that type of recommendation. If anybody has anybody who's going to rehab, you may not have seen the plan, but there's a plan called an aftercare plan. And that's what they want them to follow when they come out. And these are folks that have spent the last 30 days with your loved one, and so the idea would be they would know enough to make some good recommendations. If I would say we want to see that plan. Can we please see that plan? And I would basically hold them to that. And then if there's other things, one of the pieces of advice is be careful to not make too extensive of a list of rules. You don't want to turn it into a battle for the sake of battle, if that makes sense. So try to keep it as simple as possible and clear as possible. But it's very individualized. It depends on what you're dealing with and what you think. Yes.
Can I ask just a follow-up? His work schedule significantly contributed to his being able to hide. He worked from 4 in the afternoon to 3 a.m. So he's awake when everyone else is asleep. So with his leave, he's on short-term disability and everything. He's got all that, but can that be part of the recommendation that because they have to give him a comparable position just on a different shift?
That's a great question. I don't know enough about that. In theory, it should be. This is a medical condition like any other medical condition.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys heard, like, you can ask for accommodations that support recovery without question. I know that that's going on before. It depends on the place. And
because there's no way you can go back there.
Yeah, so you can absolutely 100% go to HR and I'm an EAP provider. I've been in those conversations before, but I will tell you, I've never had one related to addiction. It's I would say like absolutely they.
His primary is depression.
Oh, okay. So you'll probably.
So I could probably with
I
that
think that they
alone.
should, I mean,
Yeah.
they should accommodate depression based on, like, everybody knows circadian rhythms. You don't wanna do that with depression. So you could probably, I would get a recommendation for that coming out of there.
That's what I'm gonna push for.
Yeah.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Yogi.
Yes, I just wanted to share something that I was on the other side of the story. I'm an addict, guys, and recovering, grateful recovering addict.